Hello everyone, I'm Shivaji and I'm speaking from Singapore. I'm the author of 4 travel memoirs and photography books. I'm the conceptualizer of the Global Migrant Festival and Migrant and Refugee Poetry competitions. And I work as the Managing Director Asia Pacific for Frost & Sullivan, a research and consulting company. And my work has been featured in Time, Economist, BBC, Asian Geographic, and similar other venues. Today, I'll be talking about my latest book, The Other Shangri-La. What I'll do is share a little bit more about the journey as well as some pictures from this book and some stories, which will perhaps give you a bit of flavor about what this Other Shangri-La is all about. Well, this is about a trip to the Sino-Tibetan frontier in Sichuan. Now, I was born in India and I grew up and studied in India. And then I came over to Singapore. The same thing happened with my wife. She grew up in China and then she came to Singapore almost 20 years back to study and has been here since then. So we together took this kind of 1 month journey. We started from Chengdu, which is the largest city in the province of Sichuan. It's at the plains, and then we moved up and west all the way to the Tibetan highlands. Well, this was easily one of the most beautiful landscapes that we have visited, and this area around Riva or Daocheng, is what Joseph Rock had also visited. Now, Joseph Rock was the famous National Geographic explorer, and some say James Hilton's book that gave birth to the word Shangri-La was kind of based on Joseph Rock's work. Of course, you have a lot of tourists now, and these are mainly Chinese domestic tourists because this has gained a kind of popularity, particularly during autumn. But nonetheless, it has managed to retain its pristine quality and spectacular colors during autumn and spectacular during winter and all seasons. There are also many valleys, and this mountain in particular, which stands out of the Tagong Valley and is considered one of the holiest for people in this region. And we happen to travel through these valleys where some Tibetan nomads are still practicing a very traditional lifestyle. And we are fortunate enough to be able to spend a few days and nights with some of the nomad families. Now, one thing I should mention is that when you talk about these highlands and you talk about these valleys, naturally the roads are definitely going to be dangerous. So, despite the views, despite the massive spending by the Chinese government in infrastructure, the landscape is such that it's very hard to maintain these roads, and the winding nature and the precipitous falls meant that along our journeys we saw many ruins of vehicles which had finally given up on their life along this deadly highway. So at this point, I'll read a short excerpt. We were traveling along the 2,142-kilometer long Sichuan-Tibet highway. Now, I talked about nomads earlier, and a small percentage of Tibetans still live their life as nomads. And we happened to live with one of the families for a few days. And as you can see, the whole setting, the nomad tent next to a river surrounded by all these glorious mountains, is of course fantastic. But the nomads still have very tough life. Life expectancy is much lower than the average Tibetan or average Han Chinese. And also there are many social issues as well. For instance, this family we were living with, the daughter, even though she was 8 years old, was not going to school, whereas the son, who was much younger, was going to the school. The father was suffering for many days for fever because they just didn't have simple things like paracetamol. Having said that, many Tibetan nomads still practice polyandry and polygamy. So both these are practiced, and that's because they want to avoid division between families of the cattle or yaks and pastoral land, which are the main resources for these people. Many were settled by the Chinese government in towns, but some chose to go back. So at this point, let me also do a short reading about our conversation with one of the nomads who we happen to live with. Winter is the hardest time for us, Tashi told. The yaks can only eat dry grass then, but that is not enough, and it gets less and less as winter wears on. Many yaks die in winter. In winter, we come down to lower elevations. next to rivers and streams. In the past, we used to build sod dugouts. It barely lasted a few seasons. Now we build brick cement houses. Yet, even today, winter could bring peril for the nomads. During extended period of snowstorms, remote herds could get cut off for weeks from the larger settlements. Then the clock of death started ticking. If someone is lost for a few days, the yaks die first, said Tashi. If a yak dies, the man will die too if he can't come back in time. Sometimes the son dies in front of his father. After dinner, Tashi described about how she had met Sonam, his husband, at a festival in Tagong. There were more than 150 people who came for my wedding. The husband has to pay for the feast and for everything else. She showed us her two gold teeth and giggled like a young girl. I got these at my wedding. All Tibetan women must have these. Tashi was curious about how Lobo and I got married. Who paid for these expenses? How many people attended? What gifts did Lobo get? She asked Lobo, my wife, where are your gold teeth? Let me now move on to the next part of the journey, and this is one of the very unique settlements that we have near Sertar, and it's called the Larung Monastery. It's considered as one of the largest Buddhist monasteries in the world, and at some point in time, there were about 10,000 monks who were living in these very small bed houses, if I call them houses, which is good enough to store just one bed and a gas stove. So they were living there, but there has been fires, there has been government restrictions on number of people who can live in, and at some point of time, there has been as low as 2,000 monks as well who have been living there. And these monks don't just come from the Tibetan community, they also come from various parts of China, like the northeast and also southeast of China, who decide to become monks for various reasons or nuns for various reasons. And you can see in this picture, there is this line there in this road going through. And anyone above that line are actually the monks, and anyone below that line are actually the nuns. So that's how the living quarters are organized there. And you can see how dense these settlements are. It's actually a new setup. It was built only around the 1980s, but today has become one of the main centers of Tibetan Buddhism. And a big number of the patrons actually happen to be the rich businessmen from Southeast, the coast of China, who have been traveling there and sustaining the buildings of monasteries and funding many of these scholars their day-to-day expenses as well. So at this point time, let me talk a little bit about a conversation that we had with some of the monks. It takes 5 or 6 days to build such a house here, one of the young monks explained. You pay 7,000 to 8,000 yuan to buy something like this. The rate gets cheaper as one goes higher up in the mountains. That's where the children stay. Earlier, you could get a place for even 3,000 yuan, but nowadays everything is expensive. We asked the monk about the abundance of soggy biscuits and rotten food that we had seen on the rooftops everywhere. People just throw things out of their kitchens, the monk smiled. Or they feed birds and cats to gain merit and then forget to clean up. After lunch, we walked through the female quarters. There were notices outside every lady's toilet proclaiming, "Gentlemen, you will lose merit if you enter the women's toilet." Another very interesting valley, and this is the valley that you can see, and these are these ancient stone towers, very long, tall stone towers, which are still surviving in these villages. Incidentally, some of these villages around this place called Danba, they have been called by National Geographic as the most scenic villages in the whole of China. So some of these have become more commercialized, but many of them still retain their old character. Now, this particular part was arguably a queendom once, which meant that they always had a queen instead of kings, and the reign passed from queen to queen, and the women of this region were also famous for their courage and also for the beauty. For their skin is supposed to be very clean and clear because the water is supposed to be very pure in this region. So today, based on the reputation of the women of Danba, every year there is a beauty contest which is held in this town of Danba, and the villagers from all around Danba, they send their chosen nominee to this town to compete there. Just like any other beauty contest, there's a talent show, there's speech, there's question and answer, all that happens in various rounds. And actually, we didn't know about this beauty contest. And when we were passing through Danba, we accidentally chanced upon this particular event. So these are some of the pictures from the beauty contest. As you can see, the winners are given silver flowers or golden flowers if they're the champions. And also nowadays, they can get a lot of career boost if they're winning these competitions. So let me read a little bit here from the excerpts of the book. I spoke with one of the shortlisted girls as a grandmother, half of Lamo's height, grinned beside her. Lamo, the chosen beauty, was studying mass communications in a university in Chengdu and hoped to work in the tourism sector someday. I'm so happy, Lamo said. I had been practicing for this for the last 6 months. The toughest part of the preparations is to know about Danba's history and culture because the judges can ask any question on that. But my family helped me a lot. Whenever I had some query about our culture, I could always ask my brothers and cousins, and if they also didn't know the answer, there was always my grandmother. I asked if she had been nervous on stage. Yes, of course. Even after all the preparations, anything can happen. If something goes wrong, it is so shameful. All the people from my village are here. So are people from all the other villages around here. My family would lose face. My village would lose face. I don't know how my 3 minutes passed. I have no memory. I'm just very happy now. As I was mentioning, this is at the frontier of Sino and Tibetan lands. And so if you have the confluence of Tibetans, you have the Hans, and many Hans are now running businesses in these areas. And historically, this has also been a region of conflicts. In fact, many of these self-immolations which have happened against central government rule of China has been taking place in this region. So from time to time, foreign tourists and other foreigners have been banned entry to this area. And the Larung monastery that I talked about earlier, even though we were able to go at that point of time, from my knowledge, as of now, no foreigners are allowed to visit that area anymore. So all these and the history has led to a very unique situation where the two communities live with each other. But there has definitely been material gains in the life of the Tibetan people who live here, in particular women who have got a lot more rights. But the living standards have improved, incomes have improved, and at the same time, they also feel a threat to their culture. Also, it's part of the overall bigger debate about Tibet's situation in China. So here I'll read a bit about the epilogue, from the epilogue, which summarizes my experience. I had hoped that the emphasis of this trip would be on Shangri-La, but it was the other that was often the most conspicuous. The other types of caterpillar fungus, the other capitals of the queendom, the other Panchen Lama, the other Karmapa Lama, the other government in exile, the other versions of history, the other interpretations of every development in the region, the other race, the other Shangri-La. So with that, I will conclude my talk. The book is available in stores in the US, in India, and 17 other countries, and it's also available online on Amazon. I'd like to thank in particular my publishers, Konark Publishers, for giving all the support and having faith in this piece of work. And thanks to you and such sessions where we have people very curious about others. And that is the whole point of writing or writing about travel, which is to bring people closer. I'd like to thank you and everyone for watching this video and hope you read and enjoy this book and my other works as well. Details of them you can find at my website, that's www.shivajidas.com. Hope to meet all of you in person soon. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you.